Coming up on The World Today. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says U.S. President didn't know classified documents were at a think tank or his home. And at least 6 killed by tornadoes in Alabama in southeastern United States. Well, let's head off of Russia's invasion of Ukraine as we take you to another story, this time coming in from Europe. Germany's cartel office regulator has said on Wednesday that it has issued objections against Google's data processing terms and that it expects the company to make changes accordingly. The cartel office sends parent company Alphabet, Google Ireland Limited, Google Germany in a preliminary legal assessment on December the 23rd, the regulator said in a statement. It said users were not currently given sufficient choice as to whether and what extent they agree to far-reaching processing. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Deutsche Welle correspondent Cassandra Sant in Berlin. Hi, Cassandra. Google is coming under pressure in Germany. Give us the latest.
Well, Google's offices in California, Dublin, and here in Germany have all just received a strongly worded letter in the mail from the German cartel office, which is essentially a competition watchdog. Officials have written to Alphabet, that's Google's parent company, to urge the company to change the way it handles users' data. It says the current approach from the company is too non-transparent and sweeping. That's a quote. This all relates to how Google offers users the choice of whether or not their data is collected and processed on services like Google Search, YouTube, which is owned by Google, Google Play, Google Maps, and lots of others, including some third-party companies. The cartel office says users are being given insufficient choice as to what data is gathered and how.
And Cassandra, what are the consequences of the letter? Can we expect a crackdown on Google in Germany?
Well, that's the tricky part, because it's unclear what the watchdog can even actually do about this other than send a stern letter. It's not even clear if this is a formal warning or not. And very soon, on an EU-wide level, the European Digital Markets Act will start going into force this year. So some complaints in the letter will be covered there at an EU-wide level. But nevertheless, it shows that Google continues to be under pressure in Europe over how it treats its users' information.
And you mentioned EU regulations. Tech giants, including many social media companies, have been getting quite the hard look from EU regulators in recent weeks, haven't they?
That's right. TikTok's chief executive Shou Zi was in Brussels this week. He's trying to convince regulators there that his app would respect the bloc's increasingly stringent tech rules and commitments to child safety and privacy. Meanwhile, regulators are also causing headaches for Meta, that's Facebook's parent company. Last week, European regulators hit Meta with a €390 million fine. That sounds pretty bad, but they also dismissed the legal basis that Meta has been using to justify its gathering of users' personal information for targeted advertising. Meta has been trying to argue that its advertising was a necessary part of its contract with users, but regulators dismissed that claim. Meta has filed an appeal, but if this decision sticks, analysts think it could shave at least 5% off of Meta's ad revenue. Don't forget, advertising revenue is Meta's main source of income. In the third quarter of last year, total revenues for Meta in Europe were nearly $5.8 billion. So conservatively, that 5%, that could be a hit of $290 million every quarter to Meta's revenues.
A lot of money. We'll continue to watch that space. Many thanks, Cassandra Sant from Deutsche Welle correspondent, joining us from Berlin. Welcome back. United States President Joe Biden said that his lawyers searched his Delaware homes and found a small number of documents marked classified in a locked garage in Wilmington and an adjacent room. The president said his lawyers notified the Justice Department immediately and was cooperating fully, adding that no documents were found in his Rehoboth beach house.
People know I take classified documents and classified materials seriously. I also said we're cooperating fully and completely with the Justice Department's review. As part of that process, my lawyers reviewed other places where documents from my time as vice president were stored, and they finished the review last night. They discovered a small number of documents of classified markings in storage areas and file cabinets in my home and my personal library. This was done in the case of the Biden Penn. This was done in the case of the Biden Penn Center. The Department of Justice was immediately, as was done, the Department of Justice was immediately notified, and the lawyers arranged for the Department of Justice to take possession of the document. So we're going to see all this unfold. I'm confident. Thank you very much.
U.S. President Joe Biden, well, the White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre has also been trying to defend the U.S. president, saying that he did not know the classified documents from his vice presidential days were at a Washington think tank or his house in Wilmington. Now, she said Mr. Biden did not know that those classified documents, this was also after Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed a special counsel to investigate the handling of the sensitive government documents that were found there. Let's listen to her.
The president takes this very seriously. He does. He said this twice. And he did not know that the records were there when they were found. He does not know what's in them. And what he did and what his team did is the minute that they realized that the documents were there, they reached out to the archives, they reached out to the Department of Justice. And again, he was surprised that these records have been found. He does not know what's in them. And his team, once they identified that these documents were there, they immediately reached out to the archives, to the Department of Justice, and did the right thing by turning that over. And they have been cooperating very closely with the Department of Justice. He said, we are confident that their thorough review will show that these documents were inadvertently misplaced, and the president and his lawyers acted promptly upon discovery of this mistake.
All staying in the United States, but away from the documents that were leaked. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has welcomed Japanese Defense Minister Yasukazu Hamada at the Pentagon and said the alliance between the two countries was a cornerstone of peace and security in the Indo-Pacific. Mr. Austin added the countries would sign 2 defense agreements, including the increase of advanced technologies in the partnership and a supply chain agreement between the countries' defense and industrial bases.
Today, we remain deeply concerned by China's coercive behavior in the Taiwan Strait and in the waters surrounding Japan. We're also deeply concerned with North Korea's provocations toward Japan and its neighbors, and we condemn Russia's cruel, unprovoked, and unjustifiable war of choice against Ukraine. Facing these challenges, our alliance remains a cornerstone of peace and security in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And I'm encouraged by the work we're doing with our partners like Australia and the Republic of Korea. And last, I want to take just a moment to highlight the 2 defense arrangements that we'll be signing at the conclusion of this meeting. First is a research, development, testing, and evaluation memorandum of understanding. This document will increase our partnership on advanced technologies such as hypersonic defense, autonomous systems for complementary teaming with fighter jets, and high-power microwaves for air defense. Second is the security of supply arrangement. Now, this will increase cooperation between our respective defense supply chains and build critical linkages between our defense industrial bases. These 2 arrangements will further strengthen cooperation between Japan and the United States, and they reinforce our shared vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific.
And British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak travelled to Scotland and met First Minister Nicola Sturgeon for a private working dinner as part of efforts to reset the two nations' strained ties. Mr Sunak is on his first official visit to Scotland since taking office in October, at a time when both countries are struggling with mass strikes, high inflation and a cost of living crisis. The pair likely discuss Britain's under-pressure National Health Service and the economy. Ahead of the meeting, Mr Sunak's office said the informal talks will build on their in-person meeting at the British-Irish Council in November, which the British leader described as a chance to rebuild relations. Well, we're back with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and this time with the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, saying that both countries would focus on partnerships on mining and energy. They were speaking during a news conference where Mr. Trudeau announced his government will host a business delegation from Japan that will meet with Canadian battery and mining companies in the spring. Prime Minister Kishida said part of the energy cooperation will see the development of LNG Canada, aimed to export Canadian natural gas to Asian markets.
We have a skilled, educated and ambitious workforce. Obviously, we talked a lot about how Canada can be a reliable supplier, not just of energy, but of critical. This spring, we're also looking forward to hosting an important business delegation from Japan. They're planning to be meeting with Canadian battery and mining companies and potential partners. Canada, of course, has a lot to offer. We're a reliable and stable partner. We have critical and valuable resources, and we have a skilled, educated, and ambitious workforce. Obviously, we talked a lot about how Canada can be a reliable supplier, not just of energy, but of critical minerals, of commodities and resources, including agricultural resources, that the world is going to need as we move towards a net zero economy around the world.
Well, staying in Japan, Japanese prosecutors have said that they have indicted a man suspected of murdering former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe last year in a fatal shooting. Nara prosecutor's office said in a statement that it had indicted Tetsuya Yamagami on murder and firearms charges after Mr. Abe was shot dead July 8 while giving a campaign speech on a street in the city. The Nara District Court confirmed it has received the indictment. Yamagami has been undergoing psychiatric evaluation in Nara since his arrest last year to determine whether he is mentally fit to stand trial. According to Nara Nishi Police, his detention period evaluation expired Tuesday. Yamagami was detained at the scene and admitted to shooting Mr. Abe. Doctors said the bullet that killed the former Prime Minister was deep enough to reach his heart and that he died from excessive bleeding. And more on bilateral relations. This time, the Gabonese President Ali Bongo Ondimba has met with Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang in Libreville, the Gabonese capital, on boosting ties. Qin noted that China and Gabon firmly support each other on issues concerning the core interests and major concerns of the two countries in upholding international fairness and justice. Qin explained the essential requirements and characteristics of Chinese modernization, stressing that China will continue to support Gabon in jointly building the Belt and Road Initiative with high quality and helping Gabon advance the strategic plan for an emerging Gabon to realize a win-win cooperation and common development for the two countries. The Gabonese president, on his part, expressed willingness to deepening cooperation with China and creating more benefits for the people. During his visit, Qin also held talks with Gabonese Foreign Minister Marco Moussa Adamo. The two sides agreed to continue mutual support, tap potentials, and achieve more highlights in their cooperation. We head to Brazil now, where the country's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, said the security force members were complicit in letting an anti-government mob ransack the seat of power in Brasilia. Speaking at press briefing, Mr. Lula said, quote, "There were a lot of people who were complicit among the military police. There were many from the armed forces who were complicit." He says that he is convinced that the door to the palace was open to allow the people in, but he did not see that door was broken. Mr. Lula has also stepped up criticism of the army for not doing anything to discourage the 2-month-old encampment of Bolsonaro supporters outside its headquarters, where they have been clamoring for the military to overturn the result of the October elections. Thousands of demonstrators calling for a military coup to oust Lula and restore Bolsonaro to power stormed the Supreme Court, Congress and the presidential palace on Sunday, leaving a trail of smashed windows, furniture, computers and smashed artwork. Palestinian health officials say 3 Palestinians were shot and killed by Israeli soldiers during raids that sparked clashes in the occupied West Bank, adding that 1 was killed during an army raid in the Qalandir refugee camp. The Israeli military said it had been conducting arrests and confiscating weapons throughout the West Bank. The Israeli military also said that, or rather, it addressed the UN Security Council meeting on the rule of law. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that 2022 had been a deadly year for both Palestinians and Israelis, and condemned all unlawful killings and also acts by extremists.
2022 was a deadly year for both Palestinians and Israelis. We condemn all unlawful killings and acts by extremists. There is no justification for terrorism. At the same time, the expansion of settlements by Israel, as well as home demolitions and evictions, are driving anger and despair. I'm also very concerned by the unilateral initiatives that we have seen in recent days. The rule of law is at the heart of achieving a just and comprehensive peace based on a 2-state solution in line with UN resolutions, international law and previous agreements.
Kazakhstan's parliament repealed a law that gave former President Nursultan Nazarbayev's immediate family immunity from prosecution and took away his status as leader of the nation. Nazarbayev, 82, ran the oil-rich Central Asian nation between 1989 and 2019 and created a personality cult during his 3 decades at the helm. He initially retained sweeping powers when he resigned and nominated close ally Kassym-Jomart Tokayev as his successor. But the 2 politicians appeared to fall out early in 2022 amid violent protests across the former Soviet Republic, which Tokayev said were part of an attempted coup. 230 people were killed as protesters who seized and torched government buildings in several cities clashed with security forces. Tokayev then took over Nazarbayev's position as head of the powerful Security Council, and after violence ended, oversaw the sacking of a number of Nazarbayev's relatives and affiliates from senior positions in the public sector. Some of them, such as his nephews, Kariat Sabbaldi, have been detained, charged with embezzling funds from the state or state-controlled companies. Musician Lisa Marie Presley has died at the age of 54, the only daughter of the rock and roll legend Elvis Presley. Reports said she was hospitalized Thursday after suffering a cardiac arrest in her Los Angeles home. Presley was last seen on the red carpet at the Golden Globe Awards just days ago, praising actor Austin Butler's portrayal of her father in the biopic Elvis. Lisa Presley was born in 1968 and was the owner of her father's Graceland estate in Memphis, a popular tourist attraction. She was 9 years old when Elvis died at Graceland in 1977. A rock and pop singer-songwriter herself, Lisa's albums, To Whom It May Concern and Now What, both hit top 10 of the Billboard in 2000, 2003 and 2005. Tributes have been pouring in for the late American singer-songwriter. Celebrities including actors Tom Hanks, John Travolta, along with musicians Pink, Brian Wilson reacted to Lisa Marie Presley's death with tribute messages written on social media. Tom Hanks wrote, quote, "We are heartbroken over the loss of Lisa Marie Presley, absolutely heartbroken. The singer and only daughter of the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley." That's not all. Fans stopped by Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee to pay their respects after her demise. Outside the gate of her father's Graceland mansion, well-wishers gathered soon after the news of her death to place flowers and light a candle.
We decided to stop here to live out a dream of my dad's, and the sad news broke. Heartbroken for her and her family, and it's definitely a tragedy that so many young people are passing in this world, and it's heartbreaking.
Let's check in on the weather now, shall we? Business owners in California have taken advantage of a break in a weeks-long deluge to retrieve items from sites as they count the cost of the devastating weather. With California bracing for more rain, Chief Derek Parker of the fire department in Merced said officials are working to stop rivers from breaking their banks. As many as 19 people have been killed in the storms. At least 2 more storm systems were set to pound California and the Pacific Northwest starting Friday, January 13, and over the weekend. That's according to the National Weather Service, including another atmospheric river. Systems of dense moisture funneled into California from the tropical Pacific. The state has already been hit with 7 such weather systems over the past 2 weeks.
Certain things that we could grab on our way out and certain things we couldn't. One of the things that we went in for today was to grab our servers so we could get our back end back online. Do business continuity and disaster recovery plans every single year. And so I can't say you're ever prepared for this, but we have thought about these activities, and we sort of have a playbook that we go by.
Operational priority in preparation for that is to ensure that the water stays within its banks. If we're out assessing some of the levee structure, we're assessing what we can do to fight the flood.
In Alabama, southeastern United States, at least 6 people have been killed by tornadoes. Video footage captures the moment a roof was blown off amid strong winds. According to local officials, efforts are underway to rescue operators to search for missing bodies. The National Weather Service, NWS, has reported over 35 tornadoes across the southern United States, putting more than 30 million people at risk. According to the Weather Service, a large and extremely dangerous tornado caused widespread damage to Selma, Alabama, adding that the storms caused blackouts for thousands of people in 4 states. Well, back in Africa, where judgment has been reserved for January 16 on the urgent interdict application brought by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa against a private prosecution matter meant to be heard on the 19th of January. The private prosecution is being brought on by President Ramaphosa's predecessor, Jacob Zuma, who accuses him of doing nothing when he complained about the alleged leaking of his private medical records by the state prosecutor, Billy Downer, and a journalist covering Mr. Zuma's corruption trial.
Begins this epic battle between the ex-president and the incumbent. President Cyril Ramaphosa has brought an application for an interdict against his predecessor, who has summoned him to a court case accusing him of being an accessory after the fact in a case where he accused the state prosecutor in his corruption case of leaking personal documents of his health history to the public, working allegedly with a journalist named Karen Morn. In simple English, President Cyril Ramaphosa, represented by Mr. Mwako Manenche, is in court to stop the private prosecution brought by his predecessor Jacob Zuma, here represented by Advocate Dalim Pofu, before Deputy Judge President Ronald Sutherland, Justice Edwin Moklateli, and Judge Marcus Senyatsi. Citing from the null prosecution certificate issued by the National Prosecuting Authority represented in court, Mr. Manenje pointed out that nowhere in that certificate was President Ramaphosa's name mentioned to warrant the private prosecution Mr. Zuma had instituted, and that the so-called charge against Mr. Ramaphosa is not a criminal offense. His team is requesting an urgent interdict as the trial will have political implications for the current president. Mr. Mpofu, on his part, who made some concessions, also dealt with the issue of jurisdiction and power of this court to entertain the matter and accused President Cyril Ramaphosa of initially choosing to ignore and criticize court papers. He is also seeking a dismissal of the application with costs. Judgment has been reserved for the 16th of January, and we caught up with the spokesperson of the Jacob Zuma Foundation, Mr. Mzwanele Manyi, on his expectations of the outcome. Will you accept the outcome?
Only if it's lawful. But if it's a cooked outcome, we will not accept. We will accept an outcome that is in line with the Constitution. What we have here is a situation where we're dealing with a motion court. We're dealing with a civil court that is asked to overturn something that is supposed to be happening in a criminal court. That alone should be an anomaly. You as media should be asking, how is it possible that a civil court can overturn something that is in the timetable of the criminal court? This is absurd. So any outcome here that does not fit the Constitution will definitely not be accepted.
And that outcome from this interdict application by sitting President Cyril Ramaphosa will determine what happens on the 19th of that case brought against him by former President Jacob Zuma. From the Johannesburg High Court, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
And Foreign Mission Chief for Egypt, Ivana Vladkova-Holler, says the International Monetary Fund, IMF, stands ready to support Egyptian authorities' economic reforms and efforts to tame inflation. Speaking at a news conference in Washington, D.C., she added that the IMF program, approved in December, supports the authorities' own reform program, which aims to address vulnerabilities and promote sustainable and inclusive growth and job creation.
The IMF program, approved in December, supports the authorities' own reform program, which aims to address vulnerabilities and promote sustainable and inclusive growth and job creation. It is anchored on three main pillars. First, exchange rate and monetary policies will be focused on a permanent shift to a flexible exchange rate regime that would help absorb external shocks and rebuild reserves while gradually reducing inflation. Second, continued fiscal discipline and fiscal structural policies aim to maintain market confidence and ensure the downward trajectory of the debt-to-GDP ratio while strengthening the budgetary process, increasing transparency, and improving the budget composition so as to allow for an expansion in social spending. Third, a structural reform agenda will help promote private sector investment and secure strong and inclusive medium-term growth, including through reducing the role of the state in generating economic activity, leveling the playing field between state-owned enterprises and private companies, and removing barriers to trade. Let me note that inflation has been a global challenge this year, and Egypt is not an exception. And while we expect inflation to remain elevated during this fiscal year, we do expect it to fall back to around 7% by fiscal year 2024-2025. Flexibility in the exchange rate will bring several benefits. It would help Egypt's domestic economy adjust more smoothly to external shocks. It would support the ability of Egyptian businesses to sell their goods and services abroad. And it would encourage greater investment. I should emphasize again that the intention of the authorities under the program is to bring about this consolidation, bring about this reduction in debt without jeopardizing social support programs. In fact, the objective is to expand social support programs under the IMF-supported program. In recognition of the significant impact that high inflation has on the purchasing power of low and middle-income households, the authorities' approach to targeted budget support, which they have actually rolled out since the global commodity price shock hit, is the right approach. Budget support is the right instrument for compensation. This support needs to remain well targeted, meaning that it reaches those and only those that is intended to compensate for the economic shocks, including inflation.
And an appeal has been launched by the United Nations for funds to come to the aid before it's too late of 30 million children suffering from acute malnutrition in countries affected by the food crisis. The 15 countries affected are Afghanistan, Burkina Faso, Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Haiti, Kenya, Madagascar, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan and Yemen. Skyrocketing food prices are aggravating food shortages and preventing access to basic food at affordable prices. According to the agencies, conflict, climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic have worsened the situation.
The call to action is released by the UN organization to ask for greater attention and greater investment to address the dramatic crisis of malnutrition which we are seeing as a result of combination of climate shocks, conflicts, economic downturns, and COVID-19, which have increased the number of malnourished children. We now have, more than 30 million children who are malnourished, and some of them, at least 8 million, are severely affected, and that increases their risk of death up to 12 times compared to the children who are well nourished. WHO is trying to increase the access to the necessary treatment for the malnourished children, and that means increasing the number, which is now only 2 out of 10 children who receive the adequate treatment. We have been updating the science and the recommendations about how to manage severe acute malnutrition. We've been providing tools, we've been providing training to health workers and helping the countries with the highest burden who are worst affected to develop scale-up plans. We've also been trying to curb the drift towards increased malnutrition by promoting and supporting adequate nutrition in the first months of life, particularly breastfeeding, but then also adequate complementary feeding. And this is together all the work to make the environment where children live less prone to infections, which is another cause of malnutrition. So with better water and better sanitation, and above all, better access to health care, universal health coverage for primary care services to all children.
We're in China now, where an official from the country's immigration bureau said that 1.35 million people have applied for passports in Hong Kong and Macau visas since January 8th, the day the country opened its borders after 3 years. Li Haotao, Director General of the Department of Frontier Inspection and Management under the National Immigration Administration, said the number of applications for entry and exit documents will continue to increase steadily in the near future. The National Immigration Administration will dynamically adjust the management service measures to provide necessary convenience for applicants to travel smoothly. Sunday's reopening is one of the last steps in China's dismantling of its zero-COVID regime, which began last month after historic protests against curbs that kept the virus at bay for 3 years, but caused widespread frustration among its people and severe damage to the world's second-largest economy. Beijing's move to drop quarantine quarantine requirements for visitors is expected to boost outbound travel, as residents will not face those restrictions when they return. Over 100 people joined long queues outside the Immigration Administrative Office at Beijing's largest district Monday, eager to renew their passports after China dropped the border controls that had largely prevented its 1.4 billion residents from traveling for 3 years. Well, what you just saw there were live stream video footage showing amusing scenes of giant pandas thriving at a nature reserve, with 3 pandas seen enjoying a leisurely dip in their outdoor pool in southwest China's Sichuan province. The footage was captured on the iPanda multimedia platform, which provides round-the-clock live broadcasts of the daily life and activities of pandas in the nature reserves of southwest China. The trio of bears were seen taking time out from their busy schedule of munching on bamboo by relaxing in the rock-lined pool in their enclosure. One of the pandas seemed to be something of a veteran bath taker, splashing water onto its body, soaking in the nature's free in the nature, something that looks like a jacuzzi effect, but now we can see them playing there in perhaps the, well, I think a garden of some sort. Well, the iPanda channel caught many other entertaining moments, fun-loving giant panda cubs, footage of them falling. That's a treehouse they fell off, trying to get back on its feet after being, all right. It is climbing there. Well, the China Conservation and Research Center for the Great Panda is a world-leading institution for the breeding and conservation of one of China's national treasures. The center also established a global platform promoting international cooperation and exchanges involving 18 zoos from 16 countries and regions, as well as 39 domestic animal breeding institutions and more than 10 scientific research institutes. The Chengdu research base of giant panda breeding is a world-renowned institution for the ex situ conservation of giant pandas. I think that's the treehouse. They seem to be having a lot of fun. Well, that's our program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.